Racist tourist slaps a black royal guard. She's shocked when he hits back, instant karma. For 6 years, Sergeant James Harrington had proudly served as one of the few black royal guards upholding Buckingham Palace's prestigious traditions with steadfast dedication. When he first heard the woman's racist taunts, he dismissed them as the usual provocations from tourists attempting to elicit a reaction, something that happened far too often during the changing of the guard's ceremony. However, when she crossed the line by slapping him across the face, something inside Harrington shifted. The decision he made in that moment would shake the very foundations of what it means to be a royal guard, with repercussions echoing through Buckingham Palace for years to come. Comment below where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe. The sweltering summer heat beat down on Buckingham Palace as the changing of the guard's ceremony unfolded. Sergeant James Jim Harrington, a black royal guard in his early 30s, stood at his post near the East Gate, feeling the relentless weight of the day. Beads of sweat trickled down his face, soaking into the thick red fabric of his uniform and the heavy bearskin cap atop his head. Despite the discomfort, Jim remained perfectly still, resisting the urge to wipe his brow or shift his stance. Instead, he focused on his breathing, a practiced anchor that helped him maintain composure and dignity under the oppressive heat. The iconic ceremony played out around him, a grand display of precision and tradition that consistently drew eager crowds. The Guard regiment marched in flawless formation, their synchronized steps echoing against the palace walls. The regimental band filled the air with a stirring melody, amplifying the pomp and pageantry of the moment. To Jim, this was a routine he had performed countless times, but he fully understood its charm for spectators. For many, it was a living symbol of British tradition and the enduring legacy of the monarchy. Tourists crowded around the palace gates and fences, their phones and cameras raised to capture every moment. The audience was a mix of families with wide-eyed children, couples stealing romantic glances, and groups of friends from diverse backgrounds, some local, others traveling from far corners of the world for this quintessentially British experience. Children pointed excitedly, their faces lit with wonder at the guards' resplendent uniforms. Adults murmured in awe, marveling at the guards' discipline and poise, especially in such intense heat. Jim, however, had long since learned to tune out the noise. He focused inward, letting the crowd's chatter fade into the background. His purpose was clear: to uphold order and decorum, serving as both a protector and a symbol of this cherished national tradition. Despite the heat and the constant scrutiny, Jim's resolve remained unwavering. Standing ramrod straight in the far east wing, he reflected on the grueling training and challenges he had endured to earn his place among the elite royal guard. He recalled the pride he'd felt the first time he donned the iconic uniform and the deep sense of responsibility it carried. For Jim, this role was more than just a job, it was a calling. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice cutting through the air. "Hey, black one, can you smile for the camera?" The condescension in the woman's words was unmistakable, and it hit Jim like a jolt. In the crowd, a blonde woman held her phone aloft, her expression a mix of mockery and disdain. Years of training kicked in as Jim kept his face impassive, staring straight ahead. His disciplined posture and neutral expression betrayed none of the anger simmering inside him. He focused on his breathing, determined not to give the woman the reaction she seemed so desperate to provoke. Frustrated by Jim's lack of response, the woman's tone turned sharper. "What's with all this diversity?" she sneered, her voice loud enough to carry over the murmurs of the crowd. "If they're going to keep doing this nonsense, at least let real Britons wear the uniform." A few tourists nearby chuckled at her words, emboldening her further. Her comments drew more eyes toward Jim, as though everyone was waiting to see if he would crack under her verbal assault. Looking for validation, the woman raised her voice again. "Standing there like a statue, aren't you? Can't even defend yourself, huh? Do you even speak English, or just whatever they speak where you're from?" The words cut deeper than most taunts Jim had faced in his career. They didn't just insult him as a soldier. They questioned his identity and his right to be black and British. The anger bubbling within him grew harder to suppress, threatening to shatter his carefully maintained composure. The woman smirked. "Oh, come on. Not even a twitch? Maybe if we poked him with a stick, he'd move. Anyone got a stick?" Her laughter rang out, mingling with scattered chuckles from some in the crowd. At that moment, a man nearby spoke up, his voice firm. "Leave him alone. He's just doing his job." The woman turned on him, her eyes flashing. "His job? His job is to stand there and look pretty for the tourists, and he can't even do that right. Look at him. He doesn't even fit in with the others." The woman called out, her tone dripping with mockery. "Hey, you black one! You blend so well with that hairy cap, I can't see anything except your eyes. Ha ha! Show us your teeth so we can tell you're a real person." Her laughter rang sharp and cruel, and to Jim's dismay, some of the nearby tourists joined in, their chuckles awkward and uncomfortable, caught between their unease and the woman's apparent amusement. The young boy trailing at the woman's side, about 10 years old, watched Jim with wide-eyed curiosity. Tugging on the woman's sleeve, he leaned closer to the fence. "Why doesn't he smile, Aunt Haley?" the boy asked, his voice filled with innocent wonder. "He's just standing there, not doing anything," Haley huffed in exasperation. "Because he's a royal guard, you idiot," she snapped at the boy. "They're not supposed to move, no matter how funny or hard you bother them. But why does he wear that funny uniform? If he's a guard, why is his hat so big and fluffy? It looks really hot?" Haley rolled her eyes. "Don't be stupid, Daniel. It's just for show, you nitwit, to make tourists like you gawk and take pictures." Daniel tilted his head, still watching Jim intently. "But Aunt Haley, why does he look so serious? He's not smiling at all." Haley sighed, clearly annoyed by the questions. "Because he can't think for himself," she sneered. "He's been told to stand there and look stupid, so that's what he does. Use your brain, Daniel." The boy frowned, struggling to reconcile his aunt's words with what he was seeing. "But what if he needs to go to the bathroom? Or if he gets thirsty?" Haley let out an exasperated groan. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Daniel, that's enough." She seized on an idea to amuse herself. "If you're so fascinated, let's see if you can make him move. I bet he's not as disciplined as he pretends to be. The white ones are better at holding their posture, I've heard somewhere." Emboldened by his aunt's behavior and Jim's lack of response, young Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out a handful of peanuts from his snack. With a mischievous grin, he selected one and tossed it toward Jim, watching in fascination as it bounced off the guard's polished boot. Jim's expression didn't change. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead. But inside, turmoil brewed. The peanut incident, seemingly trivial, felt like the culmination of years of racism he had endured, now reduced to a careless act by a child who didn't know any better. It fueled an inner struggle, bringing to the surface all the doubts and frustrations he had suppressed. The disturbance intensified as Haley's voice rose, and the boy tossed more peanuts through the fence. A black woman, seemingly a local, stepped forward, urging the boy to stop loitering near the palace and advising Haley to keep him in check. This sparked an argument among the crowd, escalating the chaos of the scene. From inside the fence, Major Timothy Hall, Jim's superior, approached. "Is there a problem here, Sergeant?" Major Hall's tone was firm and authoritative. Jim's voice was steady as his posture when he replied, "No, sir. No problem, sir." But even as he spoke, he felt the weight of the lie. There was a problem, a deep, systemic one, that went far beyond this incident. The security guard outside, noticing the escalating disruption, made his way back toward Haley. "Ma'am, I've already warned you once. The guards are not here for your entertainment. If this behavior continues, I'll have to ask you to leave." His gaze shifted to Daniel. "And you, young man, keep your hands off the fence. If I catch you tossing anything else inside the palace grounds, you and your aunt will face a fine. Trust me, you won't like that." Haley huffed and rolled her eyes but ultimately backed down. Major Hall, satisfied the situation was under control, casually walked away. Yet this brief resolution only deepened Jim's inner turmoil, leaving him even more unsettled. As he stood there, outwardly calm but inwardly seething, his thoughts wrestled with the deeper significance of his role. Did the uniform he wore symbolize an outdated tradition, as the woman's taunt suggested? Or could it represent something greater, a Britain that included and respected all its citizens, regardless of background? The oppressive heat of the day showed no signs of abating as the ceremony continued. During a momentary lull in the proceedings, young Daniel turned to his aunt, his face flushed with boredom and discomfort. "Aunt Haley, I'm bored and it's so hot. Let's go." Haley, her patience wearing thin, seized upon this opportunity to continue her provocation. "Oh, Daniel boy, you're right. This blackguard is a boring sight," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "But you know what? He's only boring you because he's the fake guard. Look over there, those royal guards are the real ones." She gestured to the formation further down the line. Jim's jaw clenched imperceptibly at these words, his resolve hardening even as he fought to remain silent and unresponsive. As the procession approached the center of Buckingham Palace, the crowd shifted, moving to secure a better view. Amid the bustling movement, Haley grasped Daniel's hand, pulling him along with a rough tug. In the sudden commotion, Daniel's treasured toy guard figure, resembling Jim's uniform, slipped from his grasp, landing inside the restricted area near Jim's post. "My toy! My royal guard!" Daniel cried out, his voice distressed. He tugged urgently at his aunt's sleeve. "Aunt Haley, my guard fell over there. Can you get it for me, please?" Haley, annoyed by the boy's whining, rolled her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Daniel, it's just a stupid toy. Forget about it." But Daniel was inconsolable. "Please, Aunt Haley, it's my favorite. Dad gave it to me before." His voice trailed off, choked with emotion. The vulnerability of a child caught in the crossfire of hate and neglect. Jim knelt to meet Daniel's tearful eyes, his voice calm and steady. "Listen, Daniel," he said gently, "what your aunt said, about you, about your parents, it's not true. Don't ever let anyone make you believe you're less than you are. You're brave, and you did the right thing today." Daniel sniffled and nodded, clutching his toy guard tighter. For the first time since the chaos began, a faint smile flickered across his face. As the crowd began to disperse and witnesses shared their accounts with the security guards and Major Hall, Jim stood tall, a renewed sense of purpose forming within him. The uniform may have been taken, but the values it represented still guided him. Major Hall approached Jim again, his expression softer but still solemn. "Harrington," he began, "you acted with integrity under difficult circumstances. That won't go unnoticed. We'll conduct a thorough investigation, and I assure you, justice will be served." "Thank you, sir," Jim replied, his voice firm yet humble. Turning back to Daniel, Jim placed a protective arm around his shoulder. "Come on, lad. Let's find someone who can get you home safely." As they walked away from the palace grounds, Daniel looked up at Jim, his admiration evident. "Do you think I can still be a guard one day?" Jim smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in hours. "I know you can, Daniel. Just remember, honor, respect, and kindness. Those are the things that matter most." In that moment, Jim realized that while his career might have been shaken, his core beliefs and the impact he could have on others were unbreakable. Sometimes, the greatest acts of service happen outside the bounds of duty, in the quiet choices to stand up for what's right, even when no one is watching. Jim turned to Major Hall, his voice firm. "Sir, I believe Daniel's home situation might not be safe. Haley's actions show a clear lack of care for his well-being. Leaving a child alone in a crowded place isn't just irresponsible, it's dangerous." Major Hall nodded gravely, his earlier stern demeanor softening as he regarded the distressed boy. "I agree, Sergeant. This is a serious matter." Jim continued, "I know this doesn't fall directly under the responsibilities of the Royal Guard, sir, but I think child services should be involved. Daniel deserves better than being neglected or treated with such disdain." As Jim spoke, he noticed Haley's face pale, the reality of the situation and its consequences dawning on her. She opened her mouth to object, but Major Hall silenced her with a sharp look. "That's an excellent suggestion, Sergeant," Major Hall said. He turned to a nearby police officer who had arrived at the scene. "Officer, I believe we have a situation that requires further investigation." The officer nodded and stepped forward, listening to Jim and Daniel's accounts and reviewing phone recordings that captured Haley's behavior. After assessing the evidence, he concluded there was enough to act. "Ma'am," the officer said firmly, addressing Haley, "based on the information we've gathered and your actions, you'll be charged under public order law. Additionally, there are concerns about the child's welfare that need immediate attention." Haley's earlier bravado crumbled. "You can't do this," she protested weakly. "I'm his guardian. You have no right." Her protests were ignored as officers began escorting her away. A social worker from the Child Welfare Department approached, reassuring both Jim and Major Hall that Daniel's situation would be thoroughly reviewed and that temporary care would be arranged to ensure his safety. Daniel, clutching his toy guard, looked up at Jim with a mix of gratitude and fear. "What's going to happen to me now?" he asked, his voice small and trembling. Jim knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "Don't worry, lad. These people are going to make sure you're safe and looked after. I promise they'll find a good place for you." "Will I see you again, sir?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with hesitant hope. Jim smiled gently, ruffling the boy's hair. "I hope so, kid. But even if you don't see me at my post again, you'll always have that toy guard to remind you. And if you remember what I taught you today, then you've already got me right here." He tapped Daniel's chest softly over his heart. As Daniel was led away, he glanced back at Jim, his eyes searching for reassurance. Watching him go, Jim felt a surge of emotions: relief that justice was being served, sadness for the boy's struggles, and a renewed sense of purpose. Major Hall, observing the scene with a thoughtful expression, turned to Jim. His voice was far softer now. "Sergeant Harrington, I owe you more than just an apology. Your actions today, both in uniform and out, embody the virtues of the Royal Guard. Integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right, even at great personal cost." Jim straightened instinctively, though still in civilian clothes. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. Major Hall continued, "Helping Daniel, standing up to injustice, and upholding your principles, you've reminded us all what the Guard truly represents. It's not just a uniform or ceremony. It's about honor, duty, and compassion." The Major's next words took Jim by surprise. "I'd like to offer you the opportunity to return to your post, Sergeant. The Royal Guard needs people like you, those who can uphold our values while adapting to changing times." Jim's heart raced. Hours earlier, he'd thought his career was over. Now, he was being offered a second chance. "Sir, I don't know what to say," Jim stammered, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "Say yes, Sergeant," Major Hall said, a rare smile softening his features. "The uniform is waiting for you. Your actions today prove why you belong in it." Jim took a deep breath, his posture straightening. "Yes, sir. I would be honored to return." Later that day, back in his uniform, Jim resumed his post, standing tall with a renewed sense of pride. As he scanned the crowd, he spotted Daniel at the edge, accompanied by a new guardian, likely a social worker or relative. The boy waved enthusiastically, still clutching his toy guard. Jim maintained his professional composure but couldn't suppress the warmth spreading through his chest. In that moment, he understood the true impact of his role. Beyond tradition, he stood as a symbol of dignity, resilience, and compassion, a reminder of the profound difference even quiet acts of service can make.